Don't ever open your door with hope in your heart, not before you know who sent the knock, because some knocks don't bring visitors. They bring storms. They bring silence dressed in protocol. They bring a clipboard that tears your world in half. This story, it begins with one knock and ends with a woman who vanished into the cracks of a system and didn't come back for 7 months. But before I tell you what happened to Melanie Ford, let me stop and ask, how are you, really? How's your back been treating you? The grandkids doing all right in school? Still making that banana pudding I heard about last Thanksgiving? I hope your family's been safe, because what I'm about to tell you will make you hold them a little closer tonight. Melanie Ford was like a lot of women you've probably known. Worked late, slept light, put everybody else first. She had one child, Autumn, age 6. A bright, wide-eyed little girl who liked collecting rocks and drawing hearts on the inside of her shoes. They lived in a rented duplex in Charlotte, North Carolina. Nothing special, but it was clean. It was quiet. It was home. Melanie worked night shifts at the hospital as a patient care tech, and she did it all for Autumn. Because no matter how broke she was, her baby never missed a meal, a bath, or a kiss on the forehead. Then came the knock. It was a Tuesday morning in April, warm but not quite spring. Melanie had just taken off her scrubs, still had her name badge clipped to her chest. The knock wasn't frantic, it wasn't soft, just firm, official. She opened the door to find 2 people in blue coats. One man, one woman, badges on chains, clipboards, cold eyes. Ms. Ford, we're from Child Protective Services. We received a report. Melanie blinked. A report? Someone said your daughter was left home alone overnight. That was a lie. Autumn had been with Miss Evelyn, their neighbor and Melanie's close friend, who watched her every time Melanie worked late. It was routine. It was safe. It was known. But truth doesn't always matter when power shows up on your doorstep. Within 18 minutes, they'd walked through her house, glanced around without saying much, and left with Autumn in tow. No real questions, no warning, no paperwork in hand. Just gone. Melanie didn't cry. She didn't scream. She packed a small purse, tied her hair back, and walked to the county office. Nobody spoke to her that day, so she came back. The next day and the day after that. Every morning she sat in the waiting room under the buzz of cheap ceiling lights, holding her folder of proof. Work schedules, babysitter notes, rent receipts. "Where is my daughter?" No one answered. After the first week, she stopped showing up. People started talking. She probably ran. Maybe she was hiding something. You never really know people, do you? But here's what they didn't know. Melanie didn't give up. She didn't run. She went searching. She walked through government offices like a ghost with a mission. Family court, child services, legal aid, nonprofit offices tucked in church basements, places where the chairs were plastic and the rules were vague and the receptionists didn't make eye contact. Every time they told her, "Try somewhere else. We don't have access to that case. Come back next week." She wrote everything down, dates, names, who spoke, who refused to. She built a paper trail nobody wanted to look at. Then one day in June, she vanished. No forwarding address, no goodbye. No one even noticed she was gone until long after the summer turned to fall. But let me ask you something, friend. If someone took your child without cause, if the law turned its back and the doors kept closing, how far would you go to get them back? Melanie Ford was gone, but her story, it was just beginning. Melanie Ford was never the type to scream in lobbies. She didn't throw chairs. She didn't curse at clerks. She believed in that dangerous way some of us still do, that if you followed the process, it would work. But after the 3rd week of sitting in offices where her daughter's name wasn't on any list, after being told, "That's not our department," more times than she could count, something inside her shifted. She stopped wearing earrings, stopped answering the phone, stopped boiling water for tea she wouldn't drink. She started walking, not aimlessly, but with purpose. She walked from agency to agency, carrying the same folder of documents, receipts, work schedules, a note from Autumn's school, text messages from Miss Evelyn, time-stamped and clear, but no one wanted to see them. That's not your caseworker. We can't disclose placement details. If you don't have a case number, there's nothing we can do. She would nod, say thank you, write it down, and move to the next building. At legal aid, she waited 5 hours in a hallway that smelled like old carpet and desperation. The attorney, maybe 28 and fresh out of law school, tried to sound sympathetic. Without a court summons or formal filing, we can't act. Melanie nodded. There was no court. Excuse me? They never gave me a hearing. They just took her. The young lawyer looked up, blinked. Are you sure? Melanie didn't answer. She just slid the folder across the table. She slept less each night. Some nights on a friend's couch. Some nights in a chair outside the foster care building. Some nights in her own bed, staring at the ceiling like it owed her answers. Miss Evelyn tried to step in, filed a sworn affidavit, took it to the same DSS office that had taken Autumn. The receptionist never looked up. We don't accept outside testimony without subpoena. You didn't need one to take that child. Ma'am, please lower your voice. Evelyn walked out shaken. This ain't a system, she said. It's a maze with no exits. By week 4, Melanie started carrying a notebook. She wrote down everything. License plates, names, the hours different buildings opened and closed. She tracked rumors like clues. A social worker who was helpful sometimes. A clerk who saw something funny last month. A retired judge who used to care about these cases. Every lead turned into dust. By week 6, people stopped noticing her. She became just another face in a waiting room, just another woman with too many bags and tired shoes. No one remembered that she used to wear pink lipstick, or that she used to laugh. Then one night in mid-June, she visited the DSS building. Again, same lobby, same lights. But this time, she didn't go to the counter. She just sat, still, quiet, and she watched. She watched which employees whispered and which ones walked heavy. She watched which papers were tossed and which ones were locked in drawers. She wasn't looking for a savior. She was looking for a crack in the wall, and then she stopped coming. A neighbor said they saw her leave her apartment with a folder in her hands and shoes wrapped in plastic bags to keep the rain out. That was the last anyone saw her. No police report, no alert, just gone. Let me ask you something. If the world erased you one office at a time, would you go quietly, or would you go underground? Would you fold, or would you vanish and hunt from the shadows? Melanie chose, and 7 months later, the whole city would remember her name. Weeks turned into months. Melanie's name faded from office inboxes. The file, if there even was one, got buried. And Autumn. She was still gone, still living in a foster home somewhere in Mecklenburg County. But no one was keeping track. Not really. No one knew where Melanie was, no calls, no bills paid, no sightings. And because she was a Black woman, unmarried, not wealthy, not loud, no one launched a search. She became a ghost. People didn't bother to chase. Miss Evelyn kept asking. She filed a missing persons report after the 2nd month. Walked into the precinct with her shoulders square and a photo of Melanie smiling with Autumn at the park. The officer barely glanced at it. Any signs of mental illness? No. Drug use? Absolutely not. Well, people leave sometimes. She didn't leave. She was looking. Meanwhile, a new intern started work at the DSS building. Nina Banks, 23, thought she could change the world. She wasn't supposed to be in the old file room, but the copier on the main floor was broken, and someone told her to use the machine down there. That's where she found the folder, unlabeled, mismatched pages, crumpled receipts, a handwritten note on the back of a DSS meeting agenda. No hearing scheduled, no case number. Mother has returned 6 times, refused service each visit. Signed with initials no one could read. Nina didn't shred it. She took it to her supervisor. The supervisor said, "We don't process old notes from walk-ins." Nina tried again, but she was here multiple times asking, begging, and it looks like no one ever followed up. Let it go. Nina didn't let it go. She scanned the papers. She searched the system. There was no formal record of Autumn Ford being removed from her mother's custody, no court order, no assigned caseworker, nothing, just a name, a child in foster care, and a mother nowhere. By month 5, whispers started picking up again. Someone at a shelter in Winston-Salem thought they saw her. Someone else at a free clinic in Raleigh remembered a woman asking about placement files, but no one had photos, no one had proof, and Melanie's name never made the news because the story of a missing black mother without an arrest or a scandal doesn't sell airtime. Until one night in November, Nina sent an anonymous tip to a local reporter. Attached were 5 scanned pages from that folder, and one sentence in the body of the email. She was never given a chance. Check the timestamp. She showed up. You just didn't open the door. Let me ask you this. How many women disappear because someone filed them in the wrong drawer? Because someone assumed they weren't worth saving? Because somebody's busy Tuesday afternoon was more important than a child's whole damn life? That intern didn't find Melanie, but she found the thread, and it was about to be pulled. It was day 211, 7 months and 1 day after Autumn Ford was taken. And Melanie Ford, barefoot, coatless, folder in hand, walked through the front doors of the Charlotte Department of Social Services. She didn't ask for directions. She didn't wait in line. She walked straight to the front desk, dragging silence behind her like a storm cloud. The receptionist blinked. "Ma'am, do you have an appointment?" Melanie didn't answer. She opened the folder, placed it on the counter, and said, "Where is my daughter?" Her skin was cracked from cold, her lips dry, but her voice, God, her voice, was clearer than glass. Security approached, but when they saw the folder, pages covered in signatures, dates, building logs, notes, they paused. Because someone had made a mistake, a big one. They took her into a back room, gave her water, called a supervisor. That supervisor looked at the file and turned pale. There it was, Melanie's face on surveillance footage, Melanie's name on sign-in sheets, Melanie's documents, never processed, Melanie's persistence, documented, ignored, buried. Then came the questions. "Where have you been, Ms. Ford? Why didn't you contact anyone?" She laughed, not because it was funny, but because grief, when boiled too long, starts to sound like a joke. "I contacted everyone, you just didn't answer. So I stopped knocking and started following the paper. And I found it. I found where you hid my child." The next day, an emergency court hearing was scheduled. The judge, a woman in her early 60s, read the file, then looked up at the social worker on the stand. "Is there any lawful basis for the removal of Autumn Ford from her mother's custody?" The room was silent. Then, "No, Your Honor." "Has there been any attempt to notify or provide services to Ms. Ford since the removal?" Another silence. Another number. The judge turned to Melanie. "Ms. Ford, we owe you an apology this court cannot possibly deliver in full." Melanie didn't nod, didn't cry. She just said, "I want my daughter." The next morning, Melanie stood on the front steps of a small white house in a cul-de-sac. A woman from the foster agency walked Autumn out by the hand. She looked taller, a little thinner, but those eyes, they still held wonder. She saw her mother and froze, then, "Mama!" Melanie dropped to her knees, arms open. "I told you I'd find you." and Autumn ran. They held each other like no one was watching, even though they were, because by then the story had gotten out. Local news aired the footage. Mother reunited after 7-month battle with system that forgot her. But Melanie didn't speak to reporters. She didn't do interviews. She had nothing left to say to microphones. Her message had been delivered through footsteps and folders, through silence and scars. Let me ask you something. What would you do if your love was treated like a clerical error? If your child became an entry in a spreadsheet, would you scream? Would you burn it down? Melanie didn't burn it down. She walked through it. Every locked door, every shut window, and she came back with her child. They gave Autumn back quietly. No press release, no apology letter. Just a signature on a court order and a "have a good day." But Melanie Ford, she didn't go home and bake cookies. She didn't rest. She built a map. Every folder she'd carried, every office she walked into, every name written on every door, she connected the dots with red pen and fury, because once the smoke cleared, the questions remained. How many other mothers had this happened to? How many kids were taken without process, without reason, without return? She was about to find out. It started with a post, a photo of her and Autumn, no filters, no smiles, just real, and a caption. They took her. They hid the paperwork. They told me I was invisible. I came back anyway, and I'm not leaving quiet. 24 hours later, her inbox was full, not with likes, but with names. They took my son while I was in the hospital. My caseworker changed 3 times, and none of them ever called me back. They said I abandoned her, but I was evicted. Where was I supposed to go? It was the same story over and over, different states, different names, but the same system, fast to accuse, slow to investigate, and deadly when it came to poor Black or vulnerable families. Melanie turned her kitchen into a command center. She and Miss Evelyn bought a used printer from Goodwill. They printed every message, filed every name. Within 2 weeks, Melanie launched the Autumn Project, a grassroots network for mothers fighting wrongful removals, free legal referrals, emergency daycare, workshops on how to navigate DSS filings, and most importantly, a hotline, staffed by mothers who had lived it. One of the first calls was from a woman in Mississippi. They told me my daughter was placed with a relative, but I haven't seen her in 3 months. Melanie asked, "Do you have your removal paperwork?" Number, they said it was sealed. "All right," Melanie said, "we'll unseal it together." And she did. Local press came knocking again. This time she let them in, but on her terms. She sat in her living room, Autumn asleep in the next room, and looked dead into the camera. "I'm not a symbol, I'm a mother. And I want every woman watching this to know you are not crazy, you are not failing, you are not alone." Within 6 months, the Autumn Project had volunteers in 5 cities. Melanie started getting calls from state legislators. Some wanted to help. Some wanted her to be quiet. One said, "You're causing unrest." She replied, "Unrest is the right word, because rest was never an option while my daughter was missing." Let me ask you something. If the world finally heard you, would you speak for yourself or for every voice that got buried under the noise? Melanie didn't just speak, she roared, and the system began to tremble. It was an ordinary day, grocery list in hand, Autumn trailing behind with a basket of snacks. Then it happened. A voice from behind the pears. "Melanie?" She turned. There she was, Karen Whitmore, former neighbor, retired nurse, the woman who'd made the call that started it all. She stood stiffly by a display of potatoes, eyes darting, mouth thin. Melanie didn't blink. For a long second, neither woman moved. Autumn was picking cereal in the next aisle, unaware the air had changed. Karen cleared her throat. "I didn't know you still lived in the neighborhood." "I do. She looked down. I never thought it would go that far. I thought something was off. All those nights, her lights off. Melanie's voice was calm, controlled. You didn't knock. You didn't ask. You called. Karen swallowed. I didn't mean for them to take her, but they did. And that silence, that long, thick pause, was heavier than any shout. Karen reached for a shaky apology. I was trying to help. Melanie took one step closer. Number you were trying to control. You saw a black mother raising a daughter alone, and you decided you knew better. Karen didn't deny it, couldn't. Melanie leaned in. For 7 months, my baby cried herself to sleep because of you. And I hope you remember that every time you hear a child laugh. Then she turned, walked to Autumn, and took her hand. She didn't report Karen, didn't sue, because the system had already protected her, like it always does. But Melanie knew this truth. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is survival without silence. That night, she wrote in her journal, I thought seeing her would bring me closure, but there's no closure in this. There's only clarity. She didn't act out of fear. She acted out of entitlement, and a system stood ready to believe her. She folded the page and taped it to her fridge. So the next time someone said, well, at least it's over, she could point and say, no, it's just begun. Let me ask you, what would you do if the person who ruined your life told you they meant well? Would you forgive? Would you explode? Or would you do what Melanie did? Look them dead in the eye and keep walking? Because some things don't need to be forgiven. They need to be remembered. It started during homework. Autumn was 9 now. She was writing an essay for school, My Life So Far. Melanie stood at the stove stirring spaghetti when the question dropped like glass on tile. Mama, why did they take me? She froze. The sauce boiled over, and just like that, they were in it. Melanie turned off the burner, sat at the table. Across from her was the one person she never wanted to lie to. Because someone made a phone call, and the people who were supposed to protect us didn't ask the right questions. Autumn's voice was small. Did I do something wrong? Melanie reached across the table. Number you did everything right. You were the best part of my life. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Autumn said, I thought maybe I was too loud. Or maybe I didn't clean up good enough. And Melanie felt something inside her break that hadn't broken before. You could have shouted every hour and spilled every drink in the world, and you would still be mine. Still loved, still whole. That night, after Autumn was asleep, Melanie wrote again. I'm teaching her the truth now, not the fairy tale version, not the system made a mistake lie, but the truth that sometimes being black and small and quiet is dangerous in a world that expects you to be loud, broken, or gone. They started therapy, at first together, then separately. The therapist was a black woman in her 50s, wore locks, soft voice, strong eyes. She told Autumn, you are allowed to ask anything. You are allowed to feel everything. And Autumn did. She drew pictures of locked doors, of staircases with no top, of a mother carrying a flashlight. At home, Melanie started a new ritual. Every Friday, they lit a candle, not for grief, for memory. This is so we never forget how far we came, she'd say. Autumn would nod, then blow it out. Meanwhile, other children from the Autumn Project began sharing too. One boy asked, why didn't anyone believe my mom? One girl whispered, I thought I wasn't lovable. Melanie listened and cried and turned every one of those stories into fuel. She wrote a guidebook for the mothers who weren't crazy, just ignored. It spread like wildfire, shelters printed it, churches kept it on their welcome desks. Social workers passed it under the table because it didn't read like a manual. It read like survival in sentences. Let me ask you, what do you say to a child when they ask you why the world broke your heart? Do you protect them with lies? or prepare them with the truth. Melanie chose the truth, and her daughter, she didn't break. She bloomed. The first offer came in an email. A talk show, national audience, a segment on resilience and redemption. Then came another, a book agent, a production company, even a lifestyle brand that wanted to put Autumn's name on a line of backpacks for empowered girls. Melanie stared at the screen and shook her head. They want to sell the story, not fix the system. Clarice, her old attorney and now close friend, met her for coffee. I know how this looks, but visibility can bring money, influence, support. Melanie sipped slowly. So can fire, so can truth that doesn't get wrapped in bow ties and commercials. They flew her out to New York anyway. She agreed to one show, not for the host, not for the ratings, but for the people back home who needed to know you could sit on the same couch they watched from and still tell the truth. Before the cameras rolled, the producer said, "Let's focus on the positive, okay? Let's talk about healing. Redemption." Melanie looked at her. "Let's talk about how you almost let my daughter disappear because someone thought my hair looked too undone for a mother." The producer blinked, smiled awkwardly. "Maybe just tone down the confrontation?" When the red light came on, Melanie smiled, gently, calmly, and said, "You want redemption? Give it to the mothers who never got their kids back. You want healing? Start by listening to people when they whisper, not just when they scream. And stop turning our pain into episodes." They cut to commercial early. She never got invited back. They sent her a contract later. Book deal, mid-six figures. She tore it in half. "My story isn't for sale, it's for survival." Instead, she started a community press. Small, local, no sponsors. She trained women, mothers, grandmothers, daughters, how to tell their own stories, how to file FOIAS, how to attend council meetings, how to sit in hearings and not leave when the suits get tired. One day, Autumn came home from school with a note. "Your daughter speaks her mind, sometimes too directly." Melanie smiled. "Perfect." That week she wrote a letter, not to a judge, not to a politician, just to the world. Why are women only valuable when they scream? Why must our pain be theatrical before it's believed? I walked barefoot for months and you didn't notice. But now that I'm speaking in sentences that fit your timeline, you want to call it strength? It was strength then too. You just didn't care until the sound fit your speakers. She taped the letter to the church bulletin board. It stayed up for 9 weeks before someone took it down. But not before it was copied, not before it was shared. Let me ask you, if the world offers you a stage but tells you how to speak, what not to say, who not to offend, do you step up or do you step away and build your own damn stage from scratch? Melanie stepped away, and what she built wasn't a platform, it was a movement. Autumn was 10 when she stood in front of her classroom with shaking hands and a paper titled, "My Life's Biggest Lesson." She didn't look at the teacher. She didn't look at her classmates. She looked straight ahead like she was staring down history itself. They took me away from my mom because someone thought we didn't look like a family. But we were. We are. The room fell quiet. One girl cried. The teacher couldn't stop staring at the floor. Melanie stood just outside the classroom, arms crossed, trying not to fall apart. She had never asked Autumn to tell the story, but the girl had grown up listening to whispers, to therapy sessions, to the soft sound of her mother riding at night. Now she wasn't just listening, she was telling. Later in the car, Autumn asked, "Was it okay I said that?" Melanie looked at her. "Baby, it was perfect." Even the part about them being wrong? Especially that part. That spring, Autumn joined the Autumn Project as its first official youth ambassador. She designed flyers, helped organize story circles for other children who had been in foster care, taught them how to draw timelines when words were too hard. And every now and then, she'd sit across from a child who hadn't spoken in days and whisper, "I know, I've been there too." At home, Melanie kept watching, not overbearing, just present, watching how her daughter carried her story, not like a weight, but like a torch. One afternoon, Autumn came in with a stack of notebooks. "What's all that?" "Letters, for the mayor, for the school board, for the library." "About what?" "About how to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else." Melanie didn't say anything. She just reached for the nearest notebook and started reading, and crying, and reading some more. That summer, they co-hosted a mother-daughter event. No decorations, just folding chairs and open doors. Every pair who showed up got a blank journal and a pen. Melanie said, "You don't need a degree to speak your truth. You don't need a mic to make it echo. You just need to write it down and let someone read it, even if that someone is just your own child." Autumn said, "I used to think the scariest thing was being taken. Now I think the scariest thing is being quiet when you've come back." The audience clapped, then stood, then cried. Because something had changed. The daughter wasn't just following the mother, she was leading her own march. Let me ask you this. What are you teaching the next generation? Not with your words, but with your walk. Because Autumn watched her mother fight, and from that, she learned, you can build a future on top of the ruins of silence. You'd think it ends with peace, a porch light left on, a daughter tucked in, a mother exhaling after years of holding her breath. But that's not how justice works. Justice doesn't end. It echoes. 3 years after Autumn came home, Melanie sat in the back of a city council chamber. Another hearing, another panel of suits, another round of speeches about child welfare reform. When her name was called, she walked to the microphone in simple clothes. No camera-ready smile, just her truth. She spoke slowly, clearly. "I lost 7 months because someone decided I didn't look like a mother. Because someone filed paperwork faster than they asked questions. Because nobody opened the drawer I was screaming from." Midway through her statement, a man on the panel interrupted. "Excuse me, ma'am. Could you speak more forcefully? We're having trouble hearing you." Melanie stopped. She looked at him, then at the audience. Then she finished in the same quiet, unwavering tone. When she sat down, she didn't say another word. But that night, she wrote a letter. It wasn't addressed to the council or the governor or the media. It was to every woman who had ever been told she was only worth listening to when she was loud. Why are women only valuable when they scream? Why must we raise our voices to be heard? I walked into every building in this city and whispered for help, and they didn't listen until I made noise that fit their agenda. But I was right when I whispered, and I was brave before the crowd came. I didn't survive because I screamed. I survived because I refused to disappear. She posted it on the church bulletin board the next day. By Sunday, it had been photocopied 10 times. By the next month, it was framed in the community center. No one ever signed it, but everyone knew who wrote it. Today, Melanie doesn't chase microphones. She teaches workshops, helps other women file petitions, runs a hotline, and every Tuesday she meets with Autumn on the porch to write, side by side in silence, the kind of silence that doesn't erase, the kind that rebuilds. Let me ask you truly, what systems have you stopped questioning because they haven't come for your child yet? Whose cries have you ignored because they didn't sound angry enough? Are you willing to listen now? Are you willing to speak? Because Melanie Ford walked through every closed door. She turned grief into fuel, and her daughter, Autumn, carried the match. Together, they built something louder than screaming. They built a future. Now it's your turn. If this story moved you, don't just feel something. Do something like comment, share, tag someone who needs to hear it. And most of all, Subscribe to the channel, Black Women, because here we don't just tell stories, we ignite change. And if Melanie walked barefoot through 7 months of silence just to get one little girl back, what will you do with your voice?